There's a time in your life when you look back and realize that what once felt like a burden has quietly become your greatest strength. It doesn't announce itself dramatically, it arrives in small moments. A decision that once would have drained you now feels clear. A boundary you set without apology. A depth of understanding that others seek from you without realizing how long it took to earn. But getting there wasn't linear. For years, being an empath felt like carrying something too heavy for the world around you. You felt things deeply when others seemed to skim the surface. You absorbed moods, tensions, unspoken truths. And that absorption came at a cost: exhaustion, overwhelm, the sense that you were too much for some rooms and not enough for others. People called you sensitive like it was a flaw, too emotional, too intense, too affected by things that shouldn't matter. And for a long time, part of you believed them. You tried to toughen up, to care less, to match the lighter way most people move through life, but that never quite worked. Because empathy isn't something you do, it's something you are. And trying to dim it only left you feeling further from yourself. So you carried it quietly, through relationships that took more than they gave, through environments that felt loud even when no one was speaking, through years of wondering why you couldn't just be easier, like everyone else seemed to be. But something shifts later. Not all at once. Gradually, almost without notice at first. You begin to feel a steadiness that wasn't there before. A quiet power that grows from all those years of feeling too much. It's not that the sensitivity goes away, it sharpens. But now it serves you instead of ruling you. And that's where the difference begins. People assume empaths burn out young. That constant depth will wear you down until there's nothing left. But often it's the opposite. The power comes later because it requires time. Time to learn what you've been carrying. Time to turn raw feeling into refined awareness. Time to stop apologizing for a system that was never broken, just different. You start noticing the first shift in how you handle energy. Where you once absorbed everything without filter, you now sense what's yours and what isn't. Not perfectly, but enough to pause, enough to choose. That pause doesn't come from numbness. It comes from experience. You've felt the cost of taking on too much for too long. You've learned how quickly someone else's storm can become your weather. So you develop boundaries that aren't walls, they're membranes, letting in what resonates, keeping out what depletes. And that selectivity feels like power because it's earned. Another quiet reason emerges in how you process pain. Most people move past hurt quickly. They distract, they rationalize, they forget. You don't. You feel it fully, you carry it longer, you turn it over in the quiet hours, and because of that, you transform it differently. Pain doesn't just pass through you. It alchemizes. It becomes understanding. It becomes compassion that isn't naive. It becomes wisdom that can't be faked. Later in life, people come to you with their struggles and leave feeling lighter, not because you fixed them, because you saw them truly, without judgment, without rushing them through it. That depth of presence is rare, and it only grows stronger with time, because you've lived in your own depths long enough to not fear others. Then there's the way you read rooms. What once overwhelmed you now informs you. You walk in and feel the temperature before words are spoken. You notice who's performing, who's withdrawing, who's carrying something heavy behind their smile. Early on, that awareness felt like too much information, like static you couldn't turn down. But later, it becomes clarity. You navigate social spaces with less effort. You know when to engage and when to protect. You stop forcing connections that don't fit. And in that release, you find peace. Not the peace of disconnection, the peace of alignment. You also begin to trust your intuition in ways you couldn't before. Young empaths often doubt their knowing. They override gut feelings to be polite, to keep peace, to not seem dramatic. But after enough times of ignoring that inner signal and paying the price, something changes. You start listening, not perfectly, but consistently. And that listening becomes guidance. Decisions feel clearer. Relationships feel safer. Life feels less like guessing and more like following a thread only you can see. That's power too. Quiet, internal, undeniable. Another reason the strength arrives later is forgiveness, not just of others, of yourself. For years you carried shame about being different, about needing more time alone, about feeling drained by things others enjoyed, about not bouncing back as quickly. But time reveals something gentler, that your system wasn't wrong, it was thorough. You needed to process deeply because you feel deeply. You needed recovery because you give deeply. You needed truth because surface living never felt real. Forgiving yourself for that configuration frees something. It turns self-criticism into self-acceptance. And self-acceptance in an empath is revolutionary, because when you stop fighting your nature, you start refining it. The final quiet reason is perhaps the most subtle. You stop needing to prove your worth through endurance. Early on, there's often a pattern. Staying too long in draining situations to show you're strong enough, giving too much to show you're generous enough, feeling everything to show you're deep enough. But later, you realize worth was never the question. Energy management was, discernment was, authenticity was, and when you shift from proving to protecting, something powerful happens. You become magnetic in a new way, not through performance, through presence. People feel your steadiness, they sense your depth without you saying much. They trust your silence because it doesn't feel empty. It feels full, full of observation, full of processing, full of care that's been earned through years of feeling too much. And here's where it all converges. The empath personality becomes powerful later in life, not because the world changes, because you do. Not by becoming less sensitive, by becoming more sovereign within your sensitivity. You've learned to carry your depth without letting it carry you away. You've turned raw empathy into refined strength. You've stopped seeing your differences as delays and started seeing them as preparation. Preparation for a kind of living most people never reach. One where feeling isn't a liability. It's a compass. Where depth isn't exhausting, it's enriching. Where being different isn't isolating, it's illuminating. If you're sitting with this now, feeling the weight of years spent feeling too much, let it shift. Not into resolution, just into recognition. The power wasn't missing, it was forming, slowly, quietly. In all those moments you thought you were falling behind, you were actually forging something rare, something that only time and depth could create. And now, later than you expected perhaps, it's beginning to shine. Not loudly, not dramatically, but steadily. Like a gem that's finally been cut to catch the light it always held.